It's the first stage where everyone.
Except for credit cards.
No,
Of
6th
course.
grade through first through 6th graders, and then because
My bandolina.
because they do this kind of transitional system, trying to figure out what
Big non-serious.
You just
I don't think so. They come with their parents. They just
I think that's what she wanted.
okay.
Okay,
It's not a real.
yes, but it's to her. All right, well, we're gonna have a meeting now. This meeting of the Livingston City Commission is called to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Chairperson Bennett,
Present.
Commissioner Hoagland, here, Commissioner Friedman.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Present.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Present.
Now a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Let's rise for the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so the first order of business tonight for the commission are consent items. Before we take a motion, is there any commissioner who wants to pull any of the consent items tonight? All right, so is there a motion from the commission to approve consent items?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I make a motion we approve consent items A, B, C.
I'll second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Friedman, second by Commissioner Hoagland. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes?
Commissioner Hoagland,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman.
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Or?
Commissioner Sandberg.
Tonight, there are no proclamations. And however, we do have one scheduled public comment. Scheduled public comment for the skate park. Status update with Derek Smith and Lincoln Jamrock. All right, guys, you guys got the floor.
My name's Derek Smith, and I'm with the skate park. I live at 309 South Street.
I think you guys ought to speak really
Yeah,
directly in
close
the
to that.
microphone because we can barely hear you.
Nope, check.
Whoever's speaking, just pull it right up here. There you go.
Well, I'd like to say thank you for your time this evening, and I hope you enjoy what we have to show you this evening.
Derek, you're gonna have to speak right into
I
it.
would like to issue some thank yous first. I'd like to say thank you to Shannon Holmes, who's been a very crucial part of getting us to the position we are today. We've had to jump through quite a few hoops dealing with TD&H, Mears Architectural, and Evergreen. And we'll show you what we've been dealing with here in a moment. We'd also like to thank Matt, the Assistant Public Works Director. Thanks for the public bid help, as well as Lisa Harold. We harass her all the time to do our advertisements. And Mr. Bennett, who's helped us navigate through some Facebook fun, is what we'll call it. So, let's show the, I guess we'll start with the PowerPoint. Probably should let you talk for a second. Introduce yourself.
My name is Lincoln Jamrock, 124 South 9th Street.
All right, so I'll get back on track. So since the Skillman Trust, which we the skate park thank the city commission for your help and generosity there, we've done quite a few things. That fall, we actually were able to work with Aaron Young and Mary Edwards, and that is the website front page. I highly recommend going there. It's mcnairgravitypark.org. Shortly after that, we ended up having a meet and greet to introduce the skate park designer Jan Lucanville put that event on, as well as that was the time where we took some information and basically were able to get the information to make our construction documents. We got the designs back in January, and let's go through those really quick. So if you can scroll down.
Where do you want to be?
Number 2. So as we were starting to design our park, we have our mission statement. Our mission statement, once again, is our organizational mission is to provide a safe, controlled environment that uses gravity sports to bridge the gap between creative youth and a community. Notably, parks such as McNair have been shown to increase mental, physical health of local youth, as well as reduce risk of damage to private property and the occurrence of illicit behavior. So by doing this, it should empower, make kids tired is our goal. So, next slide. This is who our demographic is. So this is who our target audience is. Skateboard sports, basically, I think boardsports.com did a statistical survey, and they said that about 4% of the US people skateboard. This does not include the BMXers, the kids who rollerblade, or the scooter riders. Once again, we're trying to make an inclusive park. So hence the name Gravity Park. Now this was a lot of work. We've had many meetings, and this is the product of those meetings. These are our construction documents. We worked directly with TD&H, with Shannon and Matt. Also worked with Mears Architectural and Evergreen, who designed the park. We ended up, this is a good picture to show you. We ended up getting a donation from Jeff Ament, who's the basis of Pearl Jam, and that's the pool that's off to the bottom left, bottom right. So that's actually increasing the park size bigger than what we were explaining to you during the Stillman Trust presentation. So we're looking at approximately a 12,000 square foot park now due to his generosity. So this is the triangle. So we had to, and once again, this is the area that's in between the Miles Park baseball fields and the Civic Center. And so that's the position of it, and theoretically what it should look like when it's completed. The rest of these are just technical information to kind of show you, I guess, the minutia. But we can, and it just shows just the complexity of the park itself. And you guys, these blueprints are in front of you as well. So, and it just goes on and on. I believe this part of the park has cost us nearly $30,000 to date. So it was quite an investment. So where are we at now? So where we are now, we're in the final phase of fundraising. We've raised approximately $235,000, and with Shannon's advice, we're expecting approximately a $27 square foot build price. So we're in the process of looking for in-kind donations through rebar, fill dirt, etc., or just funds to help complete $65,000 to $70,000 deficit that we have currently. And we foresee easily accomplishing that over the next 2 months. We're approximately, if you look at the financials, we're approximately $14,000 short of officially getting Arthur Blank and Laura Kahn to a full commitment of their funding of $30,000 and $60,000. So we really achieved that goal. And do you have anything to add? And I think we just have a couple more slides, and I think that's about it. So if there's any questions. Kind of a boring presentation, I'm sorry.
No, not if you're excited about a skate park, it's very exciting. So are there any questions for Derek or Lincoln tonight? from anyone? Any clarifications on the drawings or the finances at all? Mr. Sandberg?
Just in reference to the pool component of it, and it just.
Mr. Sandberg, can you speak to the microphone so everyone
sorry.
can hear you?
Yep, sorry.
Thank you.
In regards to the pool component that was added in, it looked like in your drawings that it fits in fine with the designated area, which we had specified prior, and I just want to make sure that, there's no concerns in regards to just making it fit onto that designated area.
We weren't, we got notice, after the park was designed, we got notice that he was gonna give us a donation. And so, we spoke with Billy, as well as Billy is Evergreen, Billy Coulon. And he was trying to figure out how to make it work in that area because it's actually right next to the septic drain field. And so we're kind of pushing the line right there. But the parameters seem to be fitting nicely. It was a joint effort between Shannon, Evergreen, and Mears to make it work.
Okay.
So, with kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, we're able to create something that seems to be very compatible. So, and it fits the parameters that I believe Matt and Shannon are pleased with. So we're kind of going forward.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
welcome.
Anyone else would like to comment or get some clarification?
So you're waiting on, am I looking at this correctly, that about $14,000 that still needs to be raised so that you can get the match? Or the 30 and 15,000?
Correct.
And what are the plans as far as how do you think you're going to raise that last 14?
We kind of put on hold our Livingston Trust grant until we have a really clear idea of what we're facing. So we're approaching Livingston Trust with hopefully a $14,000 request. We hired Melody Montgomery to be a consultant as we write grants. She seems to be kind of an ace in the hole regarding that for us. And we've got a couple of different events planned. There's a few different meetings that I've got this month. One with Colin Davis at Chico. I reached out and spoke with Matt Schaefer. I needed to line up another appointment with him. And so we also have a donor board that we're actually kind of soliciting to people and donors who donate $1,000 or more. So we're kind of primarily looking for businesses who want to have a very long advertisement area, so we can share a generosity or show our appreciation or gratitude through an appreciation board. So, absolutely.
The other component is we've kind of been waiting for these plans to be finalized, and these become a pretty good fundraising tool going forward because there's certain individuals in our community who have expressed interest in giving money to the project, but also said, I'd like to see some plans first. More than one person has said that, and now we have a concrete set of plans, and I think it's going to help us leverage that last bit of fundraising easier than previously.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Friedman.
Is there skateboard competition in the state? We have soccer fields and tennis courts, and those have all been extra revenue. There's such a thing going on in the skateboard.
I think the better thing, they do have skateboard competitions. Do they have skateboard competitions in Montana? Not necessarily. Having the appropriate park gives us that opportunity to take advantage of. What happens primarily in Montana are demonstrations or demos. Tony Hawk there was a great demo that he did with a group of pro skaters that went to Missoula after they opened up. So it becomes not only a great fundraiser, it becomes a great grand opening is what it ends up becoming. But we're kind of investigating ways that we can use Skaterpalooza as a consistent fundraising tool to hopefully talk to you, the city commission again, and look for other spots to put satellite parks. So those would be our long run goal.
Do you want to talk about the concept of the park at all? How it's designed and the thinking that went behind it?
Billy is a genius, and what I perceived skateboarding when I was 16, and what I perceived skateboarding back then, and what it has become today, it's hard to put it in the appropriate terms. But Billy lives, breathes, eats, and designs skateboards for 16-year-olds every day of the year for the last 15 years. I think this park should meet the needs of our community. I think it has enough intermediate area with the addition of Jeff Menthol. That adds some really scary stuff to me, but it should hit all levels. And do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a solid, like, intermediate level park based on the heights and the depths of these bowls that are shown, especially in the rendering. Maybe the last, go down a few more slides. There we go, the rendering there. Nothing in that picture is deeper than, like, I think the deep bowl on the right is maybe 6 feet at the most, which is not an unreasonable height. And a number of those other bowls are quite a bit shorter, like 3 feet, which is more accommodating for a beginner or intermediate level type of person. And if you look at some of the other parks, I don't know if anybody's looked at the park in Big Sky, but it is big, and there's a lot of stuff that's overhead, which is kind of the threshold of intermediate to expert level, at least in my mind, as a skateboarder. I think it's a good size. I think it's a good size for the community that we have, and a good skill level for the community that we have. And it's big enough that it's gonna be useful and accommodate the user base that will probably grow for quite some time. The addition of Jeff's Bowl, I think, is a good feature. It'll allow any high-level ability people to kind of segregate themselves from the rest of the park because it is a separate area. I think that's a really good addition in terms of functionality for us. And we're lucky to have that extra donation.
One last question for me, and that's once this is built, and there you go, what would be your ideal opening scenario as far as people to come christen it, so to speak?
Oh, we were the first community in the state to receive $25,000 from Tony Hawk. We've had other members of the community. One particular individual that showed up to our last meeting 2 weeks ago. He's friends with Steve Caballero, professional skateboarder that we idolized back in the day. He's still skateboarding. There's another guy named Jake Brown from Australia. These guys would like to come here and do a demonstration. And we're considering trying to use the skate park, Skater Palooza, and the demo all as one kind of function, grand opening event next year. Is kind of some tenets of ideals.
On that note, if I can speak a little bit about the timeline. Originally, we were trying to get this thing built this year, and this design process took quite a bit longer than we had anticipated. And the window for getting the public bid process is another, month and a half, 2 months, which kind of puts us out of contention for this year, which we realized a month or two ago. So we're going to try and raise the rest of our money, go through the public bid process during this fall or winter, and be really ready to hit the ground in the spring and get a contractor online to start building as soon as conditions are suitable.
Anyone else? Thank you guys for coming out and giving us an update.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your hard work. Appreciate it.
So close, so close.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so tonight we do not have any public hearings. There are no ordinances. There are two resolutions to address. First resolution, I believe, is the first reading and will be called a public hearing will be called on that particular resolution at the following meeting. So that resolution is resolution number 4748, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Livingston, Montana. So it's intent to adopt the City of Livingston road policy. Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You are correct. This is a resolution intent. It's to hold a public hearing for our next meeting. It will address the road policy. The road policy is a product of the planning board, so it doesn't fall under the administration, but is a recommendation to the planning board itself. From my understanding, this road policy has been in front of the commission before, with the sole change this time being the new map. And that new map is on page 46 of the original. That's the only change from the previous road policy that was presented to the commission. And changes to the map and just some changes to what they thought were future growth areas and what they should be labeled as far as what kind of growth would occur in those areas. Other than that, the growth policy itself, I'm not sure how long ago it was actually written, Jim?
This current draft, we've been working on this for about 3 years.
So there is some data information in it, but the growth policy is the first step in being able to start some other plans as well. So this will probably be updated shortly after being approved, but it'll be a continuing process, kind of a spiral development, more than trying to get it all perfect. That's the concept.
Great. So, does the planning department, the planning board, do they have any comments or preliminary comments to make on this?
Not really. If you have any questions, we'll answer them.
Very good. First of all, this is a resolution that moves the process forward to the public hearing. So maybe we could start with a motion for resolution number 4748.
I make the motion to approve resolution 4748.
Second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Hoagland, a second by Commissioner Friedman. Commission discussion, questions, clarification. Commissioner Sandberg.
So as far as the previous growth policy that we had, I think it relates to 2004. Is this document considerably different? Or?
As far as format and the type of information, it's very similar.
Okay.
This was simply an attempt to update the numbers, the economic conditions, census, obviously way out.
Right.
And our current planning board's view of growth and growth trends and growth areas.
Okay.
So those are the primary.
And I noticed too, that it's, let's see, it's to be a useful tool that the city can rely upon as it reviews land use and development decisions. So in reviewing it, and I'm just asking these questions because it's new to me, so I'm trying to understand. But so we have our codes, which basically state what we can and cannot do as far as zoning, what we build, where we build it, requirements, development requirements, etc. And then we also have, I think, we follow the MCA codes as far as subdivision development, etc., which is also listed in this document. So I'm trying to determine the true use of the tool, because we already have policy which dictates what we do. So a lot of what I read through here, which I love the economic information in it, statistics and all that kind of stuff, which I think is great. But when we start looking at the goals, like goal 1, 2, and 3, we have these kind of nebulous philosophical ideas, but nothing as far as how we may, if I was a commissioner, to use that on how would I support continuing education to develop a more skilled workforce. We don't have any examples or ideas of how that might happen. And so I think there's just, I guess, not a lot of defining in the objectives and the goals on how we would do those things. And I did look at, some other cities' growth policies that had actual suggestions, and they would say we will work with the feds on Section 8 housing for affordable housing, and had specific guidelines that they were going to look at. So is that something we as a commission would look for to be added into this document in the future? And what gets back to my original question, how do we use this tool when nothing is really clearly defined as to what is our economic development? How do we, there was something in reference to corner stores or base stores or something like that. So I'm just trying to, what's the meat and legitimacy of this document?
Mr. Curtis, you want to answer that, or you want to have staff answer that, or how would you like?
I would be happy to give you my opinion on it, but again, it's not my product, it's a planning board's product.
Right.
And they've done a great job on it. And I think one of the big things is this is supposed to be a strategic level document, because it doesn't address code and it doesn't address what you should do. Now, it does give you basic guidelines on things like continue to develop fiber infrastructure, continue to look at accommodating north side. So it gives you general guidelines. I think one of the differences, and especially if you look at the county's current growth policy that they just came out with a couple of weeks ago, and this one, the big difference is the planning board did this organically. We didn't spend any money on this. So we didn't have professional consultants to help us develop it, as the county did. So I think there's probably a lot of room for improvement. It's just a really good first draft.
So would you envision, then we had our discussion as a board earlier in the spring about getting, early this, late this summer, early fall, working on updating our mission and doing a strategic plan and that type of thing. So I would envision that once we have a strategic plan, that this would probably be rewritten to accommodate what we have declared in our strategic plan.
And that is almost exactly what the county did. They started with their mission and vision, and then went to goals from there. And then the growth policy should support those. It should come in underneath of it and give you a little more meat as to how to accomplish those mission, vision goals.
Okay.
And then from that point, you actually can get down further and go to some tasks and some things that are measurable. Because that's where you really need to end up, is something you can measure. So this is kind of, I would consider the growth plan kind of the intermediate step between strategic vision and the meat and potatoes goals or tasks. It's that kind of mid-level where, hey, when you're looking at growth, this is where we envision it would be. This is kind of the overall growth plan for the city. These are the areas we think we should develop next. That's where we're going to concentrate on infrastructure. So when we look at approving developments or changing zones or giving exceptions, we should look at the growth policy, the growth plan, and say, hey, does that fall in line with the general plan? So I think it's a good start, and absolutely we need to update it as we change as we develop a strategic plan. Once we have one, then we need to make sure that the growth plan actually does underpin it and support it. And then I think we can update it at that point.
And so then back to, which makes sense, thank you, goes back to then, really this policy is not a legal binding document as to what we can and cannot do, because we have our codes. That is the law that we need to follow. So this is, I guess, I'm trying to understand if it's truly a policy or a...
Policy is the correct word, because it's not code, it's not ordinance, it's not law, but it is what we plan on doing. So just like anything else, you can have an exception policy and change it, but it is kind of the overarching, hey, this is the direction we want to head. And so these are the tenants that we're building that direction upon. And I think that's the key to it is, hey, this is what we're trying to do, and we think these are good ways to do it. So as we look to continue to develop, does that fall within the parameters that we've set up? And if it doesn't, does it make sense to make it an exception in this case?
Okay, thank you. The also then in reference to the interlocal agreement with the county, and it has specifically outlined in here, is that language that's in this policy coincide with the, what's the term we use for our agreement with the county? Compact. Is it the same language? Because I don't want to adopt different language.
Well, as of right now, and this is where it gets a little tricky, there is no current compact. It's all expired. So I think it does match up with what was there prior. But I'm in the middle of rewriting those right now, and we can definitely make sure it matches. And if it doesn't, we can always do an addendum to the plan to make sure it matches.
Because I don't, yeah, I don't want it to have us having conflicting policies if we've got the compact and this.
And what
So-
we'll do is, as we rewrite the compact, I'll reference the growth policy, and if through negotiations with the county, we change the wording, then we'll just come back with an amendment to the growth policy to make sure that it's consistent across. And we'll have to do that as we develop the strategic plan. As we do all these things, we should hopefully be reviewing all the documents and making sure they're still lining up and being consistent throughout the entire body of work.
Okay, great. And then another question I had at the end with the amendment to the growth policy. Again, that since it's currently under our policy, we have the planning board designing this document, and obviously they're public meetings and they announce them and the public is aware of it. So I'm confused on the language on page 65 in regards to an amendment to the growth policy, because do we truly have amendments on a policy if it's not code or law?
Yes, just because it'd be like any other policy I had. If let's say we had a, let's say we had a employee policy handbook. It's policy, it's not, it's not code, it's not set in stone, but it is policy. And if I was to change a policy, I should amend the policy or update the policy. I think it's just it's just a chapter that says, hey, if we're gonna change things, you need to officially change them. You can't just, okay, that's not what we meant this time, or is this an exception, or is this actually a change to the way we think things should happen? And if it's an exception, that's one thing. But if this is, hey, we're shifting our growth policy, we're actually changing the way we look at how we should grow, then we should amend the growth policy at that point.
Agreed. I guess it was the language of a community member, and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but should it not then though go to the committee first?
To the planning committee?
Yes.
Yes, it should go through the planning committee and then to the commission for final approval.
Okay. And does it state that?
That's why it's laid out here. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't remember. Thank you. And then the only other thing, I think a nice addition would be school district information, perhaps. We don't have that in there, and we have quite a bit of information on our fire and police and what they do and how many people we have, and I'm not sure that's, I don't know, I kind of got lost when I was reading that I'm not sure. I mean, we can outline how our forces work, but I'm not sure to the length of detail that we have, if that's, in my opinion, needed. And then there were just a couple where just typos using insure, INSUR, insure and effect as opposed to effect. So there's just a couple spots in there on that, but thank you, that answers my questions.
Is there any other commission clarification questions? I had a few of the same questions, so I'm not going to belabor those. But in a document of this nature, there's a lot of wording in here that was very open-ended. enhanced, support, accommodate businesses, anchor businesses to accommodate, enhance, support. There's a lot of those type of words, and I'm wondering in the final draft, is that too general a wording for a document like this, or do we need to be a little more specific by what we mean by enhancing opportunities or supporting endeavors? Sometimes, if we leave it like that, there's quite a bit of interpretation of what support means. Does support mean just write a letter of support, provide money, do in-kind work, or that type of stuff? So I don't know if this document is supposed to be just more general, or we need to be more specific, or it answers it by setting a vision, mission, having a growth policy, and then getting the nuts and bolts with goals and actions and tasks.
And I think, if I may,
Yes, absolutely.
I think the big thing with the growth policy is you don't want to lock yourself into any certain course of action. It is the policy for how you want to develop. It shouldn't give you the specifics on what to do to support, say, a business, because it's going to vary from each business to business. So you don't want to say specifically you're going to do in-kind work, because business may not need any in-kind work. What they may need is a waiver to a zoning regulation, or a change to a certain whatever it happens to be, an easement. So each thing will be different depending on what the business is, or residential, or whoever it is you're trying to support. So I think in this type of document, the ambiguity is actually good, because it's supposed to point you in the right direction. It's not supposed to give you directions. So I'm comfortable with the language of it. We can always work to make it more specific, and maybe not more specific probably isn't the right word, but more practical, and give perhaps examples of ways to do things. But you certainly don't want to lock yourself into certain courses of action. So I think the ambiguity is good, and as we look to revise it and update it, we can look for possibly more practical examples that we could include, just as, hey, these are ways that other communities have supported businesses or residential areas. These are things we can think about as we go about it. You can develop a policy where anytime you open a street, you put in fiber conduit, with the goal being at some point when we do get fiber to the door, that infrastructure has already been laid. That's an investment ahead of time. It's going to be a lot cheaper if the street's already open. Things like that could be practical, no kidding policies that are very specific and very easy to follow, but it meets the overall growth policy of enhancing the fiber optic backbone in the city. So those things certainly could be added as we update.
I have a couple more questions unless someone else has some questions. Okay. The other question I have is, having this discussion and seeing that we're looking at this for the first time in regards to moving it forward to a public hearing, and hearing that we might have a few or many amendments or alterations moving forward, would it be wise for us to maybe work through some of those first before we approve that, or should we approve that and just know that we're going to have a lot of amendments? That's my first question. And the second question is, the last time we had a growth policy was in 2004. And we're supposed to do it how often? 5 years? It's 5. So we've kind of missed a couple cycles there, it sounds like. And very curious about, in my tenure here as a commission, I don't think we've referenced the growth policy that much in our workings and endeavors. Who is the growth policy mainly for? And is it a tool for the administration? Is it a tool for developers? Is it a tool for the commission? Or should it be all of those? And if it is that tool, how are we going to make sure that we utilize it as that specific tool? I think those are important things as we're moving forward. Anyone who wants to take a stab at answering some of that?
I would like to take a stab.
Sure. Okay, Adam.
Thank you. I'm Adam Stern, the chair of the planning board. The first question was, amendments. My recommendation on that one would be to move forward tonight towards the public hearing. We've generated this growth policy update with public input, and I think a lot of the people that will show up at the public hearing have already showed up at the planning board meetings, and their input has been incorporated into this update. It's worth reiterating what the city manager said, that this is just a guide. It's not a directive, but it points out where the planning board, items the planning board has identified that are important to achieve the growth we want and avoid some of the changes we don't. It doesn't give a full detailed solution on how to get there, but like say, for example, the continuing education, this points out an important thing that's maybe lacking in our community. And so if some energetic commissioners or citizens wanted to make a big impact, they could go to the growth policy and find out some of the items that we think are important to develop, and then go on their own and to do the initiative. This particular update does have a few tangible recommendations, which we thought were important to get down in writing sooner rather than later, notably dealing with some of the safety issues with the decaying septic tanks in the Green Acres subdivision, which is adjacent to the city. And so that'll have to be addressed. There's some recommendations about some of the subdivision parkland dedication requirements. And then it's also worth noting, this kind of answers one of your questions, just briefly, the history of this was that there was the 2004 growth policy, and then come around 2009, 2010, that 5-year time period, we started working on the planning board to develop the new growth policy. But we were doing it ourselves on the board. And typically these policies, the growth policies, these documents are created by large engineering and consulting firms, and they cost $100,000. And it just it proved too much for a small board of citizen volunteers. And so the goal is, and we're going to come back and see you relating to this, the goal then is to get this small update in, because it's got some of these recommendations. It's been updated with some of the changes that's been happening with the community over the last few years. Get this update approved so we have it in place, so we're protected from some of the, so that we can move forward on things like the Green Acres and the subdivision rules. And then at the same time, hopefully the city commission can help us obtain the funding to do a real professional growth policy. And of course, given the funds that are required, we're hoping to acquire a CDBG grant, Community Block Development Grant, perhaps with help from the city with the grant writing capabilities. And it probably will require some capital funding from the city commission as well. So in that sense, maybe we can discuss that closer to budget season. But that's what's required to get a real growth policy together. And I agree that a lot of those growth policies have a lot more minute recommendations, but that was not the goal of this. This is to get some things in place, to update it for our current status, and then we have the time and space to work on a real growth policy. And then your final question, who is this for? It's for anybody who wants to read it. It's for businesses or citizens who want to move to a city. They can open it up. They can see the locations on the map where the growth is happening, help them decide on where to buy a house. It'll give them an idea of what's going on in the economy and the people and the recreation opportunities. So it's for businesses or families, citizens that will come move to Livingston. It's a guide for policymakers. Somebody who wants to make an impact can go to the growth policy and find the items that we think are important. Or if you have your own initiative, to see if it's consistent with the growth policy. And then it's also a guide for people on both sides of the table. When an issue comes, you can see, go to the growth policy and see where that weighs on a particular issue. And not that that codifies your decision, but it'll help give you context for how that issue might lie. Did that answer your questions?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Pretty well.
Have anything to add?
Just one point that hasn't been made. The growth policy is, as stated by the state, non-regulatory. It doesn't have the effect of law, but it is also required by the state that we have one in place in order to maintain our zoning authority. It has to support our zoning regulations.
And some of the subdivision activities require a growth policy in place. And in fact, oh, one more thing, it prevents capricious behavior on the part of the commission. If somebody comes onto the side of the board, the side of the table, and they ask for something, and you don't like them personally, and so you rule against them, and it violates the growth policy in an obvious way, they can go to court with that. Or it prevents capricious behavior on the other side as well. So, I mean, not that exceptions aren't allowed, but then you have to at least explain.
Thank you very much. Is there, Commissioner Sandberg?
Just one last, because I forgot to say this earlier. There is a contradictory, so page 41 talks about that we need to increase our light industrial area, but page 46 talks about our large inventory of light industrial. So there's, I want to correct that, or figure out which wood it is.
We currently have enough light industrial, yes.
Yes.
Which was a result of the old policy. That can be amended for other things.
Any other questions, clarifications?
One last statement, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Woodhull has done a fantastic job compiling this. In particular, there's a couple of maps in there where it shows, what pages are those? Where it shows all the building permits over time, page 40. There we go, that map there, and there's one down right below it. It's compiled by Jim. Not only did he write all of the versions of the growth policy, but he putting together this new document and some of this new data, which is really going to be quite helpful. So thanks to Mr. Woodhull for all his help and support, for putting up with us on the planning board for all these years.
Thank you very much.
He should get the key to the city.
He already has the keys to the city.
Take them.
When you talk about maps, it brought up another question in my mind, which is on page 47, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm probably mistaken on this. Montague subdivision, did we de-annex that?
Yes.
We did.
The very top.
Yeah, the top purple one up there. Yeah, okay. All right, so that will be something we can fix up there. Yeah. All right, so any public comment?
Yeah.
Jake Keeper, Logo 6, West Park. I'll sign afterwards.
Okay.
Now regarding this organic document, can somebody, either Jim or Alex, come back and say what in this document does this policy not want to see happen? They said that it existed. I just want to know, what was that feature?
Okay. Do you understand the question? I think there was a comment about, writing the policy. We wanted to make sure that, we said what kind of growth we'd like and what kind of growth we wouldn't like.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing.
So, Jay, one of the critical elements to Livingston is maintaining the community, the character of the community, maintaining sort of, I don't know how you want to describe it, but we have a unique community that's got unique architecture, and the people and the buildings all look different, and you got to plan to maintain that, or else that character can be lost. So that's an example of getting the type of change we don't want.
That's all you're saying on there, or is there something? I sort of detected undercurrent there that.
Jay, I think the big thing is we just want to make sure that as we look at the growth policy, there are types of growth you don't want. If you get too compacted growth, you're going to have problems with either the infrastructure, the sewer, the water, if you're not careful on how you develop things. We've already talked about the north side of the EMS response for firefighters and ambulance. Those are the kinds of things you have to plan for, or you're going to get that growth where you can't support the growth in the city. it grows too fast, or if it grows in the wrong manner, then we aren't going to be able to supply the services to the citizens in the way that we want to. So those are the kind of growth, that is the kind of growth you're trying to avoid. There's not a certain type of growth, like multifamily homes or industrial, or there isn't anything we're trying to exclude from Livingston. It's just making sure that the growth, where it happens and how it happens, is in a positive way that we can continue to support and that continues to support the community.
Okay. Oh. You want to talk? Mr. Carey?
Oh, yes, the example that Adam gave of the subdivision regulations and the parkland dedication, that's something that planning board feels has been probably not ideal up to this point. We've often accepted land that isn't really suitable. So we're actually suggesting that the regulations be changed to tighten up the parameters on what we will and won't accept as far as parkland. It's useful for the city. That's probably the best example I can come up with. Right.
Does that answer your question, Jay?
For the time being, I've made up other questions.
Okay. Any other public comment?
Patricia Grabo, 204 East Calendar Street.
Jay, did you sign in?
Yeah, he did. I saw him.
Okay, thank you.
I'll keep my eye on him.
I want to go back.
Keep talking. Great. First of all, I want to compliment the planning board on working as hard as they have on this, and to to Jim Woodhall. He's one of the few institutional memories we have going on right now in Livingston, Montana. And Jim will probably, there are 3 areas I'd like to just address briefly. Because over the 18 years I've been attending city commission meetings and being a commissioner, I've watched some things that seem very important at the time kind of get lost in the shuffle. And I think they remain important, but the institutional memories kind of faded. And I'd like to make sure that as we proceed, that we be sure to get the input that allows these things to come back to life somehow. Okay. An example is the Watson subdivision. When I was on the commission, we did the Watson subdivision. One of the policies that we really believed in and worked hard for was just view shed. And if you'll see, isn't that blue the Watson Jim? Okay, so if you see the Watson subdivision, you'll see that as you look out from Secretary Park, the way we had created the Watson subdivision was so that there would be cluster zoning, so that when you look out from Secretary Park, you do not see anything but the mountains, between you and the mountains. It can be cost effective, although there are people in town who are interested in developing the Watson subdivision. They said as long as we protect the view shed, it's probably not going to pencil out that well. And of course, the hospital right now needs affordable housing. It would be lovely if some of that development could take place at the Watson subdivision. But it is a belief, an adamant belief of the commission at the time that the Watson subdivision was created, that we save Livingston's view shed, because it is so gorgeous to look from the city on the mountains and not see a bunch of houses. Okay. I want to be sure that these things get incorporated, that we somehow create some sort of institutional memory protection as we look forward to this. Just 2 other ones. One was, at one point, we looked at a circumferential, adding another mile to Meigs Road, and you could end up with a circumferential around the north side of the city. So as the city grows, you can have more than one access to should be, and my background is largely in urban planning, should be the direction in which we grow. The problem, of course, the only limits really are the kind of soil that is up there. But it's still something that should not be lost in the institutional memory. Another one that is the elephant in the living room that we just simply ignore, which is our shops. It is like the heart of our community. And we're ignoring them really essentially, and should have until the carcinogenic plume was mitigated. But now we have no excuses. We have no excuses to directly address the shops and the kind of public-private partnership that allows us to grow in a healthy way, taking a serious direct look at those shops and the land surrounding the shops. So those are things that I think that we should be sure that we don't forget about. There's a lot of tools that we can use. PUDs, planned unit developments, are wonderful tools for growth. And when you talk about affordable housing, PUDs require that developers put affordable housing as part of the complexity of their development. So as I say, I think that we've had a lot of people over a long period of time who worked really hard to bring out some major concepts to the future of Livingston. The other thing I want to just mention, when I first started working with the city of Livingston 18 years ago, we had a city-county planning board. And I think as we move forward, that is something that the commission should really reconsider. Because a lot of these areas of growth are, in fact, county now, but the city will look forward to annexing significant parts of those as we move, if we move quickly at all. And the city county planning board, so it doesn't require that we create a compact and then we redo something and then we create another compact. The city county planning boards worked really well until the war that created the county growth policy about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I just want to mention those three, especially though. The circumferential, the view shed, protection of our view shed, and taking a serious look. There's wonderful institutions in this state and in Livingston. We're so privileged to have an organization called Future West. They would be an ideal organization to take a look at the future of our shops. So just want to make a couple comments on it and compliment the city for retaining its planning director for so long. Thank you.
I already spoke.
Well, no, I just wanted a point of clarification, Patricia. Are we talking about our city shops? What shops are we talking about?
MRI.
Oh, okay, those aren't our shops.
No, they're not ours, but they are in our community.
Right.
And I'm very interested in private-public partnerships.
Okay. No, I just wanted that
as we
clarification.
move forward.
I wasn't.
Yes.
I yield.
Commissioner Sandberg?
Not a question for Patricia. Sorry, just something I guess I wanted to mention, and I share this as information with the commission because I found it out myself most recently. But when we look at our growth policy and we have defined historical aspects that we want to maintain and areas of growth, etc., I think it's important that we look at all of our subcommittees and components and how they interact with growth policy. One in specific being the historic preservation district. So we have, which was news to me, I knew we had the downtown historic district and I knew that we had a historic residential district. But we do not have any guidance written on how to maintain our historic residential district. And I don't know if the commission was aware of that, but we do have for the downtown city, but we don't for the residential. Which came to the light most recently when somebody on Yellowstone Street was looking to subdivide his lot to make he had an existing garage that is converted into an apartment. And so he wants to split his lot, and that went before not the planning board, but the Board of Adjustments, thank you. So my point is, if the city wanted to make, I mean, the city chose to make a historic residential district for a reason. And I would assume that would be to maintain the integrity of that historic district. But if we continue to allow, if we have no document outlining what can and can't happen with those lots in that district, we are going to lose that historic perspective with situations such as this, where folks will start dividing their lots and selling off their front homes or selling off their back homes for apartments, etc. So I know that that's not a discussion or topic for tonight, but I really think if we truly, as a commission, want to maintain that residential district, then we need to have a document that defines how to maintain that residential historic district as well.
Commissioner Schwartz?
I just want to piggyback on what Sarah said. I've always been against that type of zoning that we have throughout the city. And that's what it is, you know, as far as being able to subdivide your property from front to back. And I can see it maybe on a case-by-case basis, but I really disagree with doing that. And I did serve on the Historic Preservation Commission, and there's quite a bit involved, I think, in naming another historic district. If I'm not, I mean, having purview over it, Jim. You have to refresh my memory.
There's actually 4 separate districts that were
That's what,
identified in the original survey: east, west, residential, downtown, and Beach Street red light district,
Right.
which is very small. The regulations in the downtown are based on an overlay zone, so we're using our zoning authority to write regulation. Theoretically, there's no reason we couldn't do that for other districts. But Commissioner Sandberg brings up several related but not identical topics, because you're dealing with historic preservation and zoning, and also subdivision. And the subdivision is a tougher nut to crack because that's separate state law. And because we're not a charter form of government, we can't alter that state law.
That's right. Okay. Been through that before. Okay, I remember now. Thank you.
Does this pertain to the growth policy?
Okay. I just want to mention, to piggyback this, there are over 400 buildings in Livingston, Montana that are on the National Historic Register. We have more buildings in Livingston on the National Historic Register than New York, Philadelphia, and Boston combined. So it's a huge number of buildings.
Thank you very much.
Gratefully.
Any other public comment? Any other comments from the commission? Commissioner Holden?
As someone who attends the planning board as the commissioner, I know we've talked over and over again about this being a document that we know is not ready to the level of completion. But I think the direction of this document is great. And I think it shows the hard work, not just of the planning board, but I think of the city. And I think it is in the direction, or it shows us going in the direction as a community that we want to see. And I would say I've heard that multiple times from other people. So I'm glad we're at where we're at, but I also know that it's not complete. And I hope that kind of helps people understand that we are, as a committee, the committee knows that we have more work to do. It's just we need to move forward on this growth policy so it's at least moving forward somewhere, because we are behind.
What is wrong in being behind?
Well,
Jay?
the last time we approved one was in 2004, so, or that an official growth policy.
All right. Do we have roll call, please?
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes?
Commissioner Holton. Yes. Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Four.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Or
Motion passes. Resolution number 4749, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Livingston, Montana, accepting the sewer and water extensions for Brookstone subdivision. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, this is the acceptance of the sewer and water extensions for the Brookstone subdivision. If you reviewed the maps in there, you can see that they've done all the work necessary. It's been tested. We've actually also looked into the green acres for the water, so that was a benefit of this extension, is that we were able to move as fast as them. Still working on the MOU for that, but it should be done fairly soon. We should be able to get green acres connected to this city system. So all the engineering has been done, it's been inspected, and has been deemed acceptable for acceptance by the city, and we are ready for the commission's acceptance.
I'll start with a motion. Is there a motion from the commission on resolution number 4749?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we pass resolution 4749.
I'll second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Friedman, second by Commissioner Schwartz. Commission discussion? Clarification? Is there any public comment? Any public comment on resolution 4749? Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Holton. Yes. Commissioner Friedman.
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Four.
Commissioner Sandberg.
or
Motion passes. Moving on to action items. URA grant approval for Joel Reinhold's managing partner of Todd and Ed's LLC grant request for solar project for 205 and a half South Main Street. Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This grant approval was put forward by the URA for consideration by the commission. The administration's position hasn't changed from the last time we received URA grants. Until we can secure the long-term funding, the administration does not recommend any further grants out of the URA.
Thank you very much. Is there a commission discussion? No? Questions, clarification? Mr. Sandberg?
I would agree with the city manager that we had this conversation last time. Until there was sustainable funding, I thought we specifically stated to the URA when they were here that we wouldn't be funding anything due to the unfunded needs that are already out there. So I would agree with recommendation of the city manager.
Any other comments, questions, clarifications from the commission? Commissioner Holden?
Do we have any feedback from the URA or representation or anyone from the project?
I apologize, I missed that last meeting. Since I am the liaison for that, nothing to bring forward at this time.
Yes.
I'd just like to add, from what I understand from the URA, they did not actually expect approval of it, but they did want to approve it just to be consistent with their past guidelines, that this project met their past guidelines of what they had been approving in the past. However, they understood that the funding was not there, which is why I think they're not there.
Commissioner Holden?
I don't think we've had a solar panel system request, if I recall. Have we? I don't think so.
Energy efficiency.
That's all, yeah, that's part of that.
So, I mean, when I read through this project, it's a great project. It's a great idea. And I want to at least state that I would love to support it and will in the future if it comes to it and there's funding for it. And this is like completely everything that the URA and the energy efficiency aspect of their plans fulfill. So I think it's awesome. I think it's a great project. So let's hopefully get this figured out so we have more funding to work through these great ideas.
The other Commissioner Schwartz.
Yeah, I'd also like to echo my sentiments as well. I approve of the project, although we can't obviously because of funding constraints at this time, but I want to go on record that I do approve of it.
I'm gonna make a comment, but Patricia, you can start to make long trek up here. If you got some comments.
I think so.
You know, I'm in the same position that I'm still interested in seeing how just the basic functions of the infrastructure for Livingston are going to be funded. So I'd have to hold judgment on this until we actually see some financials and some long-range projections, which we haven't done yet. Patricia.
Yes, Patricia Grabo, 204 East Calendar Street. As much as I respect those who differ with approving this grant and further grants from the URA, and I do in fact respect them enormously, I want to argue for letting the URA continue the work they're doing. URA ostensibly was created to pay for half the sidewalks. It didn't have to. The law doesn't say the URA has to pay for half the sidewalks. That was just the sales pitch that occurred, and I was there to get the URA enforced. Reality set in, and suddenly the URA became enormously effective in doing all kinds of things that have begun to take shape in our downtown. We're at the point where we're just they're beginning to feel their oats and begin to do some pretty effective things in the downtown, not the least of which is, for example, is getting the Albemarle up and running and generating $30,000 a year in taxes. And I have a building that also, and I'm writing a letter to the editor on that because I think it's so important that we don't strap them at this point. I think this is the first solar project. It could be enormously effective for our downtown. If you've gone to the attic at Whiskey Creek, that's a URA project. If you look at, it's brought life to our downtown. And it wasn't the half of the streets, because I just paid off my half of the streets. But I could have done without that, but I could not do without getting the Albemarle up and running. That is a signature corner, is terribly significant to the future of our town. So I think that the idea that we will stop the momentum of the URA, who really is doing a terrific job, in order to rethink the funding. I always worry about the URA money turning into a slush fund for the city. And I do not mean that disrespectfully, but the idea that we've stopped the momentum of this independent board, advisory board, when they're doing such a terrific job because we want to rethink all of this, and we owe all this money for half the sidewalks, just doesn't make sense to me. This city is now generating more money for its tax base, and as the economy grows and as things do well, then the URA will have done its job. And I disagree. I think we should allow the URA to prove the things that they see are necessary. They have created a great partnership with the downtown businesses. We talk to each other, we talk to them. I just think it's really important not to stop this suddenly and say, oh, well, we really want these funds for something else. Not really. This is what they were meant for. This solar panel, to me, it has evolved into something that's beneficial to the town. And the law in court allows us to do that.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Any other public comment? Right, is there a motion from the commission? Oh, Commissioner Holman.
I'm just wondering, can we, at this stage, table this so that it stays on for potential discussion in the future after we have more answers to our funding issues with URA funding? And can we table it and just hold it? I don't know. At this point in the process, it's okay.
Procedurally, you can table any item in front of you, so you can absolutely table this item, and then you can pick it up, and when you picked it up off the table, it would be exactly where it is, it would stand with the recommendation from URA, and at that point, you can approve or deny. So if you just wish to table it and leave it where it is, that is absolutely procedurally correct.
So that,
You have the floor.
all right, I'd like to make my motion. I want to make a motion to table this item until we have more information and for a future vote.
Is there a
So I
second?
need to, I should say, action item.
Yeah. I'll second that.
So, motion by Commissioner Hoagland, second by Commissioner Schwartz to table URA grant approval for managing partners for solar panel projects. Any other discussion? Roll call?
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Holton,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
For.
Commissioner Sandberg,
Against.
Motion passes. Action item B, discuss, approve, deny, authorizing the city manager to sign a letter of acceptance with Northwestern Energy. Mr. Hardews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one's slightly bizarre. This is a letter that should have been signed back in 2013 when the franchise agreement was made with Northwestern Energy. This was a failure on Northwestern's energy part to file the correct paperwork. Technically, we could have voided the franchise agreement at that point. Looking at the current franchise agreement, we didn't see a need to change the agreement. It seems like it's a fairly standard franchise agreement. I didn't see any objection to it. Northwestern Energy has asked to clear up their paperwork if we would be willing to sign at this point to confirm that we will not void the franchise agreement. At this point, administration recommends that you approve that I sign it, and we file it away, and then look to renegotiate the franchise agreement when it comes up for its natural expiration.
When would that be?
This particular one, I think, was 10 years, so it should be 2023. But I'll double check on that and get you an accurate answer.
Sounds good. There's any questions or clarification from the commission? Is there a motion from the commission?
I'll make a motion to approve action item B.
Second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Schwartz, second by Commissioner Friedman. Any other further clarification? Any public comment? Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Holton,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Or.
Commissioner Sandberg,
Against.
Motion passes. Last action item, discuss, approve, deny Brookstone major subdivision final approval. Mr. Cardews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the final approval for the Brookstone subdivision. This has been seen by the commission several times before. There have been no significant changes. Ms. Woodhull has confirmed that they have met the requirements of the subdivision as set forth. And at this point, the administration recommends approval, final approval of the subdivision.
All right. So I guess, do we need a resolution for this? Do we need to bring it back as a resolution?
We should not have to bring it back to a resolution. This is a final approval, so it should be straightforward.
Okay. So there's no resolution resolving to accept it. Okay, just this. Okay.
We can double check and make sure that from past subdivisions, we have not.
It's always been an action.
All right. All right, well, is there a motion from the commission?
Madam Chair, I make a motion, we pass action item C.
Okay, is there a second?
I will second that.
All right, so there's a motion by Commissioner Freeman, second by Commissioner Schwartz. Discussion, questions, clarification, discussions. Commissioner Sandberg?
So when was the last time the commission saw this?
Preliminary approval was granted by the commission July 19 of 2016.
So a couple questions in regards to the criteria, and I don't know who do you want me to address those to?
Technical criteria?
The responses to the conditions, I have questions, so who should I direct those questions to? To Mr. Woodall? Okay, so number one, a waiver of the SID protest must be signed by the subdivider that guarantees the participation of all lots in the subdivision in a future improvement district for public improvements. What public improvements would those be?
SID can be used for anything that the city determines to be necessary. For instance, water loops, further water looping, green acres. If the lots go unsold and because the lot owners are responsible for sidewalk, the city may decide to put in sidewalk, it takes too long. Before we know what we can use that for.
So just in that example, sorry, why would we, if they're required to put in sidewalks as part of the subdivision, why would we come in and do that for them?
That's a poor example. Say this subdivision was not required to improve Miles Lane because it was previous existing city street. It becomes apparent that development on the other side it necessitates improvements, widening. These lots on the other side would automatically be involved with their neighbors to do that.
So what are the parameters on the SIT? How high can you tax these people before they protest?
It's a function of the bond council's tolerance on how we put a bid together or bonding together.
But what's the representation of the people living in the subdivision?
I have to have the city attorney help me, but if they have waived their right, they have no protest to the SID. It's up to the city's discretion whether it's a reasonable tax and adopt it or not.
Is that currently how we do all of our subdivisions?
It's been a standard for everyone we've done in at least the last 15 years. I will tell you that I'm not aware of any new subdivisions that have been subjected to an SID in that same 15 years.
They have not had them. So why the push for this one then? Do they see potential problems down the road?
No, we don't see this in any different. Ridgeview Trails have the same clause in their approval.
Just trying to understand the protection of the community member. And at what, yeah, sure.
And I think in this case, the waivers for the subdivision, the community members represent, or protection in this case is you. It's the commission's decision on what should be taxed and what shouldn't be taxed. So you as their representative would decide if it's fair or not on their behalf.
So can this be done a different way in the fact that this not be part of the subdivision, and then if plans come up later on, we can create an SID after the fact?
It can be accomplished in that manner, but then they do have the right to protest, which legally I'd have to see what the difference is between protesting and coming to complain at a commission meeting.
If I may,
Please.
the formal protest at I believe it's 40% bars you from forming the SID.
40%.
And that's city policy. State law is 50%. We have an SID policy that's been adopted by the city that increases that threshold.
I guess I'm just going to say I'm not comfortable with approving an uncapped SID. That just doesn't seem realistic to me. Correct. So that's gonna be a concern for me. Talking about the licensed engineer, is required on-site during utility construction. Are we on-site too?
Yes, we know,
So we'll monitor their engineering.
either by Public Works directly or our contract engineer.
So they'll be on-site when they're on-site doing.
This is after the fact now. This was during the construction of the utility lines.
What, can you define the utility reimbursement plan? And do we have a copy of that?
We do not yet. It will be brought to you as a separate resolution for agreement. They haven't quite finalized it yet. I'm working with them to make sure that the numbers are realistic and it's something that the city, that staff can positively recommend.
And what is, can you define for all of us, a utility reimbursement plan?
They have installed, and I'm going to be close but not exact, roughly 2,600 feet of sewer line, but not quite that much water line. And there is property, other private property in between this development and where those extensions began. And there's also potentially benefited properties beyond the subdivision, including Green Acres, Miles Lane, Trailer Park, and beyond towards Willow Creek that could potentially use these utilities at some point. And because this developer has provided that capacity, there is a mechanism where they can have an agreement with the city that we will charge some of that extra cost onto those future users. They can't make a profit, but they can make the difference between the capacity their development uses and what they actually provided in the pipes.
And how do you determine
Basically do calculations on the capacity of the pipe and determine how many residential equivalents exist in that pipe and subtract that development.
Sorry. So guess I'm gonna, because I still have a few more questions, so I'm gonna back up just a minute. So we're being asked to approve the subdivision, but yet it sounds like construction has already started on utility lines.
Actually,
Is it the cart before the horse a little bit here?
the preliminary approval sets out the conditions. Those conditions include what the utility lines will look like. They go build them and then come back for final acceptance. That's why the previous resolution was done before we took up this final subdivision.
But if we don't approve this, they have sewer lines to nowhere then?
The utilities are in the ground. If they meet the requirements and the conditions of the preliminary approval, they get their approval. If you determine that these conditions have been met, under state law, they're entitled to subdivision.
So these criteria here are the final resolution to what we had asked for a year ago. Okay. I guess I'm still concerned why we don't have a reimbursement plan then yet. Okay.
In this case, we don't care. The developer's already paid for it. It's there. So as far as administration goes, none of that money is ours. They pay for it. We didn't put any money out front, and we won't get any of the money back. This is really just an agreement for their benefit. So if they fail to complete it, it doesn't hurt the city at all. It only hurts themselves. So we're willing to approve the final subdivision, assuming that they will do what they need to benefit themselves and finish the payback agreement.
I can understand that perspective, but I think there's also a perspective of our due diligence, making sure that it's a fair and equitable plan that's being provided to other citizens of the community. So I do, in essence, think we should care what that says.
We do care what it says, but it will come before you again before it's approved. The payback plan itself will come before the commission for approval before it's instituted.
Right. But that's why I mean, the fact that if this has been in the works for over a year, and I'm kind of, I guess, mystified that we don't have that document yet, and it's still being worked. Apparently, there must be a hang-up somewhere, or we would have that document. So I'd be curious what that hang-up is.
there's actually several issues with it. One would be the radius of determining who actually will benefit from it. So you have to decide how far out. You also have to decide how many hookups there are, and once you decide that, then you have to decide how much of that can be paid back per hookup. So it's just a mathematical exercise of determining how many possible new hookups are within a possible area, and then trying to determine how much they are entitled to be reimbursed for those hookups. So we've gone back and forth a few times. It's just a matter of really trying to define how many lots, how many units are there in Green Acres that could hook up, how many are there in Gardner that could hook up. And right now, obviously, none of that is in the city, so we have to look at how long it will be before that would be required to happen to see if they could get it back within that time frame. So then time frame plays a role in it. So there's a lot of calculations we're going through with them, and we've been negotiating it for a while. I think we're pretty close on it, but we don't want to delay the actual construction based on whether or not how much we're going to pay them back.
Thank you. Just a clarification, because I'm not sure how the city, I know we have some code enforcement issues already, but we're asking them to have a noxious weed program to mitigate. What do we do to enforce that? Or is that just another thing we ask and we don't follow up on?
In this case, it'll actually fall in the purview of the new noxious weed plan the commission approved 3-4 meetings ago. So we do have our contractor and we do have someone that applies them. So we actually will send people around, part of the parts and building crew,
Okay.
to inspect that and see if there's a noxious weed problem. Then we will be able to hold them to that portion of the agreement.
Okay. We, I guess, asked for some fencing, and then we later determined that the fencing, what that was there was adequate. What changed?
We didn't ask for it, we asked that they take responsibility for maintaining it. And they did write that into their covenant, so as the lots sell, the new owners of those lots will be responsible for the continual upkeep of those border fences.
Well, I'm just reading there that says we required them to provide fencing. It didn't say maintain.
The fencing was there with at the outset.
Okay, I'm just reading what it says. It said provide. So that's where I came from with my first question. So it's up to the property owners to maintain what's existing there currently.
Yes, they're kind of somewhat agricultural property.
And who's responsible for making sure that's enforced?
There's a homeowners association created by the subdivision.
Okay. And then if they don't follow, we step in, or does somebody step in?
We can step in based on the, again, code enforcement standards.
Okay, so it would fall under the code enforcement. Okay. I'm just asking, we asked them to do this, so I'm just trying to understand why and how we will enforce what we're asking them to do. I vaguely remember the drainage detention pond. So can you help explain that again to me, please?
Its function?
Yes, because that has to do with drainage, right?
Basically, the DEQ regulations require subdivided ground to contain its storm drainage because you're adding impervious surface. So an engineering calculation is done to determine how much runoff is going to be there and compared to the pre-development condition. And the difference has to be contained on the property and metered out at the same rate that would benefit the grass field. So that's what the structure is designed to do.
And metered out into our sewer?
It can be metered out into a curb gutter system. It can be, once it is detained for the proper amount of time, it's just runoff as it was pre-construction.
So our plan here with this subdivision is just to have it run off to, what do I want to say, monitor the flow, regulate the flow. Okay. So the engineers that determine that, is that the developers' engineers or the cities?
It's the developers, but that plan is approved by the cities.
Okay. What happens if we determine, as we have in other subdivisions, that that drainage is not appropriate? Whose responsibility is it to fix that if it's not adequate?
I believe there's at least a 1-year warranty on all of this infrastructure work. So at least for that time period, it belongs to the developer. After that, It's probably one of the better examples I can come up with for why we do the SID.
To make up for our mistakes.
Pick up someone's mistake.
Cash in lieu of parks.
Yes, I got the calculations here, but I can read it to you. It was determined that, of course, the subdivision regulations require 11% of the land be dedicated as park or be received cash in lieu of that value. The property was valued at $18,840 an acre. The net development is 5.23 acres. 11% of that is 0.576 acres times 18,840. They have provided us a check for $10,852.17.
So when we look at cash in lieu of parks, remind me, if they chose to do a park, do we just get the land or do they develop the park as well?
They just have to donate the land. We can ask for additional help or plans on their part, but you just get the land.
So you just get the land, so the developer doesn't turn it into actual green space.
It belongs to the city.
It's a city responsibility. Okay. So procedurally then, I guess I wasn't clear that approving a preliminary development is approving the development. So did we ask then for a SID waiver? Does anybody remember?
Yes, it was clear as a condition.
Okay. I'm just curious if anyone else is, it's just back to the question of, making sure we understand what we're approving, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And so having this process, I think this might be my first, for me personally. I'm not sure if the chain of events was communicated appropriately to me as to what exactly we were approving, because I do have concerns with some of the issues here, and I don't know what my role or what I can do in regards to those concerns. So,
I guess it depends on the nature of the concern. If it's a concern that they didn't meet the requirement, then that's absolutely a reason to disapprove until they have met the requirements that they were set forth in them. But if it's a problem with the actual requirements, that is something that was set forth by the commission a year ago. And so those are the requirements that the commission agreed to and said that the developer had to meet. So if it's whether or not they've met it, that's an issue that certainly you can vote on, but the requirements themselves are a problem, and that's something that should have been addressed when the preliminary approval was accomplished.
okay, so I guess on these preliminaries, we need to understand exactly what we're approving then. I just really, with conscious, I can't vote on an unlimited SID. I just can't stomach that. So what do I do?
Procedurally?
Yeah, thank you.
You vote against.
Okay, but can I though, if we stated, I guess this is my conundrum, if I guess we asked them to put an unlimited SID, and they did do that, can I vote against it then?
Yeah.
I think procedurally, the cleanest way would be to abstain.
Okay.
In that case, you're not voting against it, which alleviates the problem of this is what you asked them to do, but you're still not voting for it.
Okay.
If you can't, if your conscience doesn't allow you to vote for it, I think it perfectly procedurally would be appropriate thing would be to abstain from the vote altogether.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Chair?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Those are two options.
Do you have any other? No.
No, I think if we moved forward and the motion didn't pass, it would be a poor reflection on the commission of the city in regards to not upholding our portion of the contract.
Sure.
If we as a city, for instance, if this was something approved before you had gotten on the commission, you know, then what you're doing is you're approving what the commission had already set forth and the city had set forth as requirements for the subdivision. So, but if the commission as a whole didn't approve it, I think we'd be in a liable situation. I'm assuming a legal situation, because we set out criteria, and now we're telling them that we're not approving criteria that we already set out. So we could be sued.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, I'm finished.
Okay. Commissioner Hogan?
I know one thing I just want to bring up from the discussion from the past is, as someone who is on the planning board, one of the issues was the land value. So I appreciate that the parks versus,
Payment in lieu.
yeah, and cash in lieu of parks. What I really appreciate is that the initial offer was, I think, 5,000 something, and now it's twice that, because we required as a committee and as a commission for them to come up with an analysis or an assessment of the property value so that they were paying us what the land was worth. So I know that was something the committee, the planning board fought for, and expected, and seeing the difference in that amount, I appreciate a lot, because it seemed low before, and I'm glad that the board caught it. The other thing, would you say, I guess this is maybe like Jim, this document is approving requirements that we expect on all subdivisions, correct? So we have to have some of these questions or concerns from Sarah answered, we have to relook at some of our requirements. So at this point, it's what it is. And this is what we're approving. Did they fulfill the expectation of the city as far as what we require with subdivisions? Yes or no? Okay. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Commissioner Schwartz?
Yeah, and I just to make everything very, very clear that when this subdivision came up, I was approving it at that time with, you know, with everything that was in there. And at this point, you know, the city's coming back to us saying they've met the requirements that we approved under that. And that's essentially what we're voting for now, because the city said, hey, they met the requirements. And that's what we're at. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, otherwise, the city would tell us that they hadn't met the requirements. Otherwise,
Well,
that's it. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, you're right. If they hadn't met the requirements, I don't think we'd have this action item.
right.
At this point. All right, is there any other commission discussion? Is there any public comment? Yes.
J.T. for 106 West Park. I was reading on the infrastructure and how it was, Mr. Woodall said that the sewer and water main that's going to be extended is going to be greater than the lots in the subdivision. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought he said. And then he went on to say that as people hook up on there, that the developer could be reimbursed, but he could not make a profit. Who says a person can't make a profit in today's world? Is it just Park County or Livingston?
Well, you're talking about a philosophical.
No, I know. I'm talking about if a person sees a vision and he builds an infrastructure that can the more people than this regular, the adjoining parcels of property could log on to, where does the city commission have the authority to tell somebody that they can't make a profit on their investment?
If I may, before you go ahead. Okay, we're not, they'll obviously, can I finish?
Yes.
Okay. They'll make a profit on their subdivision. But the infrastructure which is owned by the city is the city's property. They're putting it in, they're paying for it, as most subdivisions do. They'll pay for it in one way or the other. They are, this, we already resolved. Resolution number 4749, the city commission just resolved to accept the sewer and water into the city's system. So we basically maintain it now from now on. And the idea is that they can get reimbursed for costs that then benefit other people, but they can't get reimbursed excessively to make a profit of it. So they're going to get reimbursed for the infrastructure that they have placed in, but not at a level of profit, no. Because the city doesn't operate on the model of profit.
I understand that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any more public comment? Come on up.
Tricia Graber, 204 Calendar Street. I think Commissioner Sandberg raises a really important question. And to ignore it right now, I understand why the commission is feeling they need to ignore it. But that whole idea of an unlimited SID and undefined SID, this commission, I believe, should not allow for that, probably ever. And it could be a policy that this commission takes seriously and takes a look at. To me, it's almost unconscionable that would be built into something. So I concur with Commissioner Sedgwick on this, and I think the commission should follow through in some way to address this as you move forward.
Is there any other public comment? Okay, we did have a motion. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Vogler? Yes. Commissioner Friedman?
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz?
4.
Commissioner Sandberg?
Abstain.
Motion passes. City manager comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in respect to the time tonight, I will pass on my comments. Just thank everyone for coming and hope you have a good night.
Okay. Mr. Sandberg.
Just two things. One came up at the meeting today, drain field at the Civic Center. Is there any plans to loop that into city sewer? And how many other septics do we have?
So as far as the city property, there's a smattering of them, as well as wells. There's some people not tied into the water system, some people not tied into the sewer system. There are long-term plans to look at sewer extensions out to the Civic Center, but that's going to be technically challenging with the location of Fleshman Creek and some other, and the lagoon itself. So there's some water table issues that are going to have to be overcome, and probably dealing with the lagoon as well. So we are looking at it, but it's going to be a while before we actually get a sewer extended out to the Civic Center.
I know that when the school district renovated the high school, we put in new sewer lines, and we had the fairgrounds actually the school district generously allowed them to tap into those lines. And I guess I just remember we have some pump stations out at the high school that we had to enhance a little bit. So I'm just puzzled why it wouldn't house the civic center, or why perhaps that was overlooked during that whole process. Before your time, philosophical question, but anyway. Northwest Energy. So they have that new transfer. I'm not going to use the correct terminology because I don't know what it is.
Substation.
There you go. Substation that's going in, which when presented to us was asking to give them the ability to an easement to go up the side of that hill, which I remember Ms. Hoagland and I voted against it due to the viewscape and the size of the poles. When I look at the poles that are at that substation right now, they dwarf what is going to be on that hill. And I'm concerned and trying to understand, and it could just be, did they have to have permission to build those poles as high as they are? And for those who were concerned about an overpass in the viewscape, once those lines go up on those poles, it's going to dwarf anything that an overpass would have ever put in for the viewscape. So I guess driving through there every day, I'm shocked at the size, and I'm just trying to understand, did we approve that, or did they have to have those approved, or did they just have carte blanche to put whatever size poles they want?
If I understand the process, and Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong, once they were granted the easement, there's no limitation to the height requirement for the utility poles themselves. So once the easement was granted, basically it gives them carte blanche to build whatever size poles they need to run the utility through there.
Including the ones at the substation. Okay.
The only height limitation we have currently is for signage. There's no height limitation for utility.
Okay, I'm just trying, I can't remember the conversation. I just, and I don't know if Darrell remembers any of it, but I just remember, I think, and again, I realize this was before your tenure here, that what was disclosed to us was the poles on the hill. I don't ever remember stating that they were going to have these monstrosities at the substation. And so I feel good that I voted against it. I don't feel good that the construction's going on, because it's aesthetically it's horrific. And I guess I'm concerned and disappointed. I realize there's nothing we can do, but again, just a reiteration, my opinion only, on how important it is that we get, when we're provided with information to adopt a resolution, et cetera, that we thoroughly understand all the criteria involved in what we're approving. So thank you for listening.
Commissioner Sports?
I have nothing. Thank you for your patience while I'm dealing with my back issues. Missing several meetings. I apologize. Hopefully we'll have that complete by Friday. Thanks.
Good. I'm all right.
One thing I want to state off of that, Sarah, at that meeting, they did say that the poles wouldn't be taller than what they are now on that side of
On the hill on that side.
As far as the substation, we had nothing in the conversation.
Have you seen this?
Yeah, at the substation, yes, but I haven't seen anything on the hill yet. I'm worried now. Two things. I want to thank the Recreation Department for their awesome Summerfest, and Maggie Tar in particular. We're so lucky to have her as someone who works for our city. I thought it was a great little event, and I've heard only really good things about it. So I'm proud of everyone who worked so hard. Another agenda item. This is the note for you. That I would like to put on the agenda for future discussion or for an action item is discuss, approve, deny, the 10th Street pocket park that was voted in by the Parks and Trails Committee, unanimous, and the community members that were there, they had it multiple ways for it to be discussed and opinions to be heard, where, you know, open meetings, agenda item that was published, was on Facebook for feedback, it was on, I think the city, may have, I recall something to do with emails as well, but it was approved by the Parks and Trails, and I wasn't at that meeting, but I would like to put it on as an action item for us to discuss and approve tonight. Do I need a second on that still? We used to do that, and I feel like we've kind of gone away from it.
Yep, second.
Okay, thank you.
If it's a recommendation, the committee, then it doesn't need
Okay.
a motion, but
Anytime we put an action item on, we were always getting a second. So before, and it seems like it's changed, but not just with you, just the past year or so. That's all for me. Oh, and the Hoot's coming up. Excited.
Thursday.
Thursday.
All right, public comment. Thoughts? Do you have public
Go-
comment?
go-
Come
go
up, you
ahead.
don't have to raise your hand, just come on up.
Regular public comment, not on an agenda item?
No, this is not on, this is on any item that has to do with the city that we have jurisdiction over.
Bill Atkins, 1222 Ridgeview Trail. It's bad handwriting and it's slow. I got both things. Trail. So sadly, I'm leaving in a couple days, maybe Peace Corps. And thanks for having me for 8.5 weeks, Livingston, about 2 months in the end. I've been harassed by police lately. I'm a law-abiding citizen, 15 years sober. I know a lot of code, follow code. I know more code than most officers of the law, a lot of city attorneys and attorneys. I bring it up in making a comment to the commission that while I see a police commission on the website, namely Dave Pettit jumped off the page because his business is discriminating against me now based on some employee's statement to police, and police are taking actions. What I've started to see a pattern of is police action, not on facts, but on someone's story, and it's unconstitutional. It's just, it needs a constitutional review, how policing happens in this community. I know this is a challenge nationwide with police forces, but I recommend, what I'm trying to say tonight before I leave is I highly recommend, if you have a police commission, get it active and oversee and have oversight of your police force. Make sure they're doing law and law enforcement. I feel like there's some habits and maybe bad habits where in the case of my harassing Bill Watkins, it was sort of babysitting businesses on non-legal matters. You said an inappropriate thing, Bill, according to some people. That's not law. I know my Constitution, I know my Bill of Rights. There are some things you cannot say in this American life of ours. You can't threaten, you can't use hate speech, you can't incite a fight. There's certain things you can't do. But I'm so proud of our First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and I hope you guys are too. And I found some trouncing on it by our local police force in the last couple of weeks. Not even necessarily with intention. I just think it's a laziness that happens, and you want to please somebody, a complainant, you want to go please them. You want to please a girl, a 17-year-old girl. You want to please her father, but then you forgot to please the law. You forgot to actually have a law process, as the 14th Amendment says. I have my First Amendment. I have my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness until facts plus circumstance makes a reasonable person think a law was broken. So it's constitutional review for the police. I really recommend, in general, Jay can, maybe oversee something. There is supposedly a police commission. I saw a 3-member commission on your website. Activate it, get it going, have some oversight. Not to be, oh, darn those police and darn them. Just, it's pro Livingston, pro children. Go back to sidewalks and looking at littering code, enforcing law. Get officers enforcing law, being law officers, not business babysitters, or a girl makes a complaint and you're a babysitter on non-legal matters. So that was a bummer at the end of my trip. Other than that, God bless you all and thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment?
You better believe it.
All right.
Jay Keeper, 1106 West Park. I was so glad to hear Jim Woodhall say that now you have a city weed ordinance policy, or would you, that was what I heard last night. I didn't take a pen with me, so I'm just using my memory tonight, which is sort of sketchy, but I just want to make sure that I heard that right.
Weed maintenance.
Okay, weed maintenance, okay, not a policy, okay. Well, I remember about 2 years ago, a friend of mine picked me up, put me up in his pickup truck, and he said, let's go up in the edition, in the Star Edition. And we went up and we saw overgrown grass, weeds, vacant houses, whatnot. And I came to the commission and I talked to you about it. They said, well, now that's a code enforcement policy. So they said, well, people that you have to go down to Bennett Street. Well, not only did I go down to Bennett, not only did I bring back a tablet with the street addresses there and the locations on there, I gave it to Mr. Woodhall and the people in the office. And I'm going to say it's been 2 years and I still have a landline and I'm in the phone book and I never received one phone call from the office regarding the complaints that I saw that regarded basically weeds on there. Another thing that I was told on there was the interim city manager, Lisa, they told me when I was concerned about the fix or the main hotel there. And I said, well, what is going to be done about that? And she said, well, Jay, it's the throws are being sold on there. And so that's a good thing there. Well, obviously, the negotiations must have failed there. Could anybody tell me as far as who is the owner of that property? Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're looking for open up the vision, our view on there, the removal of the main hotel would be a delight for the city of Livingston. I just see it's just a piece of, it can't be, there's sewage in the basement. It's been pumped out. I'm talking about Kenyon Noble, adjacent to Kenyon Noble, that building.
Okay, okay.
I could see your eyes flickering, and so
Yeah,
I
I was trying to
thought,
figure out which hotel you're talking
right,
about. Okay, got it.
there. So I just want to know who owns it on there, and what is it? Is there any possibility that this could be just basically level? There is eminent domain on there. I am familiar with that procedure. And another, I'll let you think about that there. Now I'm going back to 1980, 1992 on there. Carlos Siri, Jay Keeper, Gordon Swandle, and Mike Fleming were the original board members for Crime Stoppers there. And it ran for like I'm going to say 1981 to about 95, and it just sort of petered out. And there was a dedicated line in the police office there where chips would come in. And I remember I was the treasurer, and George Bryce and Bob Oakland would come to the meetings and they'd say, this is what's going on. This deserves a monetary payoff there. And so they would say, they recommended $50, $75, $100. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, we had a cash a voucher system on the register. It was made out to Jane Doe 25, John Doe 25, and the police station and the sheriff's department would notify John Doe 25 or Jane Doe 25 on there that the check would be available between the hours of 1 and 4 on a Thursday. At 4:01, that check was no longer available there. So they had to work with us there. And based on the swimming pool, the slashing of tires, the paint, the whatnot, I think it's time for this. I realize there's a franchise fee, use the word Crime Stoppers, but I would think the city attorney could probably find a name that isn't been copyrighted, and the city and the county could have a line dedicated for tips, and then all the payoffs could start again there, because it's amazing what people will do for $50 to $75 when they know there's a reward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patricia Grable, 204 East Calendar Street. A couple of questions and a comment, 2 comments. Were we ever able to get your note, the city manager's notes to the city commission online so the public could read it?
We're actually in the middle of revamping the entire website, and that's
Okay.
part of the revamp. So hopefully in about 4 to 6 weeks, there'll be an entirely new page website, and should hopefully include that.
I really would, I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I have a lot of respect for you. Can we get copies, like if I put in freedom of information, could I get the past copies of those notes?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll do that. They look like a really positive move. And I want to commend the city commission on the noxious weed. The concern I always have is enforcement. Like the most noxious weeds in the town are on our city parking lot over by the Yellowstone Ballet. And also code enforcement for historic preservation. I'm concerned about that continues as a problem. The Historic Preservation Commission is a hold of downtown businesses that are supposed to come before the Historic Preservation and get their signs approved. It is not happening, and they keep sending out those notes, and it just doesn't happen. Is there any teeth that can be put into this at all? I mean, even the Cool Cafe is such a darling sign, but you know what? It's never gone before Historic Preservation Commission, and it should have once they started. So we have a beautiful downtown because we have had a Historic Preservation Commission to some degree. So I think there's some way to get teeth into this thing. Now, I wasn't here at the last meeting. I am really concerned, and I've become more and more alarmed at the Livingston Rehabilitation Group. Was any money at all towards the water sewer treatment plant soil mitigation provided by the Livingston Mitigation Group? I know that Commissioner Hoagland had mentioned that, I think it was last March. Was any money at all? That's directed to the city manager.
There's nothing in the current budget from the West Restoration Group for the wastewater treatment.
Was that requested by the city?
I can't tell you. Not recently. I'm not sure. if there have been.
In March, like when Commissioner Blue brought that up?
I don't have a good answer for you now. I'm not sure what was asked.
Right now, that you've always had a city commissioner on that rehabilitation group board. You no longer have that. I don't think you know that. Shannon is now that is not an appropriate representative on the Livingston Rehabilitation Group. It should, in fact, I believe, be a commissioner in spirit and in law. And I'm concerned, it's become more and more public on a venue called Classmates Shattered as to what's happening to that money. And it's of concern. I think we are a party to this. As a city, I think we have an obligation to look into what's actually happening to that money. I think it was totally appropriate for the money for mitigating the soil for the water treatment plant to come from them. There is money there according to Amy Reynolds, who's the DEQ person that oversees a lot of this. I'm just really concerned right now about what is happening there. And I think the city should still look into getting money from that group for the soil mitigation of the water treatment plant. I'd like to maybe meet the city manager or something on this because I'm very concerned about it. A lot of us are.
Why don't you call up Mr. Cardus, make an appointment, go and talk about it?
I'll do that if I may, please.
Because if we gave any direction, would be we look into it.
It's $16 million in that fund.
I don't know.
It's not, they don't have it left, but they did have. They have quite a bit left.
I don't think that committee has ever reported to the city commission. I don't think they're required to. They're an independent board that manages that fund according to what the state mitigator director of the state directed them to do, or the legal system. What's that?
From the settlements, from the settlement.
Yeah.
In fact, I talked to the judge on this, Nell Swandle. As far as he's concerned, it should have been public. It shouldn't have been private. There should have all the activities of that group should have been disclosed to the public, and would only take a decision by the district court. So, and we do have a board member as a city on that board.
Is there any other public comment? Okay, I didn't make any comments, but as we were talking tonight, one thing did come to my memory when Jay was talking. Is it possible for us to get onto the agenda, the second commission, regarding resolving a contract for the public bathrooms at the guest house?
1 second.
How would you like it stated on the agenda? Would you like it as an action item?
Action item, yeah, to discuss,
Discuss.
you know, what our steps are in order to get a resolution there so the public can use those bathrooms. All right. No more public comments? Entertain a motion for adjournment from the commission. So moved. Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting of the Livingston City Commission is adjourned at 8:44.
We didn't have to nudge you once.
Short straw, so.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're the only